From the Dignity Health Studio at the Bakersfield Californian, this is Strictly Business, presented by the Greater Bakersfield Chamber of Commerce. Sponsored in part by the law offices of Young Wooldridge, San Joaquin Community Hospital.
And here's your host, Jimmy Phillips of San Joaquin Community Hospital.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. I'm Jimmy Phillips, Executive Director of Marketing at San Joaquin Community Hospital, and I'm filling in for Cindy Pollard today. Later in our show today, we will be joined by Jeff King of Barbich, Hooper and King to discuss the best ways to increase your cash flow. Then Tracy Leach is stopping by to talk about the new organization, Kern Citizens for Energy. But first, let's take a look at some news you can use. AB 1897 is a sweeping new law that will increase liability on employers who contract for labor. The purpose of the law, which goes into effect January 1st, 2015, is to hold companies accountable for wage and hour violations when using staffing agencies or other labor contractors to supply workers. This law applies to employers who use staffing agencies or other labor contractors to supply workers. Here's how the law works. If the labor contractor fails to pay its employees properly or fails to provide workers' compensation coverage for those employees, the client's employer will now be legally responsible. Stanford teams with teacher union CTA to train for Common Core. Stanford University is joining with the state's largest teachers union to prepare schools for the Common Core education standards that will change the way California students are taught and tested. The recently launched project will start off training 160 teachers and 24 administrators, who will in turn reach about 50,000 educators over 3 years. The hope is that the new standards will promote deeper thinking and improved writing and better prepare students for higher level math and for problem solving in and outside of school. In science, for example, instead of memorizing facts for a multiple choice test, students would be expected to solve a scientific problem over a period of time and often working in a group, using laboratory materials as well as online resources. Bakersfield office market has the lowest vacancy rate in the U.S. Yes, you heard that correctly. Bakersfield's office market has the lowest rate of vacancies in the nation, according to a report from Colliers International. For the third quarter of 2014, Bakersfield's office market showed a vacancy rate of 7.39%. In addition to being the lowest of any U.S. market, Bakersfield had the third lowest rate in North America, behind only Toronto and Montreal. The vacancy rate for all North American markets was 13.11%. Now on the phone, we are joined by David Blaine of WorkLogic HR, reminding us to be careful when suspending an exempt employee without pay. David, good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you today?
Doing well, thank you.
Well, let's jump right into this. Are there any types of pay deductions that an employer may impose to discipline an employee?
Non-exempt or hourly employees, yes, because they're paid for the time that they spend working. Exempt or salaried, non-hourly employees, no. Yes, under federal law, but not under state law unless you suspend for an entire week.
Interesting. So talk about then, what are the situations when an exempt employee could be suspended without pay? What are the circumstances?
If someone were suspended during the designated work week, for example, if your week started Saturday and ended Sunday, and he said, we're going to suspend you for a whole week, you could do that and not pay for that week as long as the employee still makes enough to meet the minimum salary to stay exempt. And the problem is that a salary for an exempt employee, you're not supposed to adjust it, if they work more hours or fewer hours. And so a deduction of a couple of days sort of violates that principle.
So is there a length of time that an exempt employee can be suspended without pay for disciplinary reasons? Is there a standard that people should operate or go by?
Well, I guess there's probably three answers to that question. First, you can do it for a week. If you go any longer than that, then you have to worry about them dropping below the minimum salary requirement, which creates more problems. Secondly, at some point you have to say, is it effective? if I were to suspend someone for 2, 3, 4 weeks, the third problem is also that I believe at some point the EDD would claim that was an involuntary termination.
Are there certain notification processes that an employer should follow when they are suspending or disciplining an exempt employee in this type of a situation?
Well, I think you have to make sure that the employee knows what the designated work week is that the company has selected, and to clearly suspend before the work before that time period. And then finally, if that employee works, let's say you suspend an employee, if that employee works 5 minutes during that week, for example, if someone shoots them an email or calls them for help with something, you have really blown the suspension. You have to pay them for that entire week.
So not only just for the day, but actually for the entire week.
Yes, the principle is that an exempt employee needs to be paid their full salary for any week in which they perform services. Doesn't say how much services, it's any services.
Okay. Interesting. Well, I know a lot of people are confused, and even business owners have confusion over the differences between exempt and non-exempt employees. Where would you direct someone who's looking for resources and just to educate themselves overall on the differences, whether it's disciplinary actions, lunch rules, etc.? What's the best place for people to find out more information about this?
Well, the rules themselves are stated in the individual wage orders. There's 17 wage orders that can be found on the website for the Department of Labor Standards Enforcement, DLSE. You have to figure out your industry or occupational wage order, and then the rules for exemption are in the first section, the first paragraph. And that spells that out. The meal periods are in there also. It is very complex. At some point, after you get past the basics of it, probably just asking for help from a professional.
Last question for you. Do they change a lot? Is it kind of a thing where they stay pretty consistent, or from year to year do the labor laws change?
Well, the labor laws relating to exemptions stay pretty much the same. Those haven't changed in a long time. And sometimes there's some argument around some of the edges with case law, but primarily the ones you have been asking about stay the same. Most other laws, there's changes through labor laws throughout the year.
David, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I know this is a subject that a lot of business owners often struggle with, so we appreciate your insight this morning.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Pensioners will eventually outnumber pension contributors, and that's certainly interesting news, that the ratio of employees paying into CalPERS to retirees taking money out fell 25% in the last decade, according to a recent report to the fund's board, and the trend is expected to continue for years to come. In 2002, there were just over 2 active employees per retiree. CalPERS data shows. A decade later, it was 1.5 workers in the system per retiree. CalPERS has anticipated the trend, the report says, and moves to increase employer and employee contributions and other changes that will help mitigate the demographic impact. Still, the changing ratio has an impact on the fund, the report states, and has to be part of any discussion on funding and level risks. Do you have the unfortunate privilege of working on a holiday? Proposed California bill would offer double wages. Californians working through the holidays could get a heftier paychecks under legislation that would mandate double pay for Thanksgiving and Christmas shifts. As more and more retailers and restaurants remain open on what have historically been days off, said Assemblywoman Lorena Gonzalez from San Diego, workers deserve an extra amount of pay. She plans to unveil a bill that would require additional pay, a policy she settled on in lieu of seeking to bar stores outright from opening on the holidays. Certain industries require some employees to work 365 days a year. Gonzalez noted, recounting how her mother worked as a nurse and would sometimes be called in on holidays. But she draws a distinction between indispensable services like police departments or hospitals and other businesses. And I'm sure that many of you have noticed that more and more businesses not only are opening earlier in the day on days like Black Friday, but they're actually opening very early on Thanksgiving. I would guess it's only a matter of time before they're open all day Thanksgiving. Of course, Christmas is already going down that road, etc. So certainly some developments to continue to monitor. Global warming labels coming to Berkeley and San Francisco gas pumps. Drivers filling up at gas stations in Berkeley and San Francisco may soon get a shot of accountability along with their petroleum, with stickers on pumps warning that burning fuel contributes to global warming. Advocates say the proposed warning labels, which would be the first of their kind in the country, could make a difference in reducing Bay Area residents' carbon footprints. Opponents, including oil industry representatives, see the labels as a politically motivated attack on free speech. San Francisco is drafting a nearly identical ordinance that the City Board of Supervisors could make law by March. Supporters hope that simply putting this information in front of consumers will motivate them to drive less. An environmental group fighting for the labels, 350 Bay Area, compares them to health warnings found on cigarette packages. When we get back, we will have our first in-studio guest. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We'll be right back.